GamingBolt presents 14 things you need to know before you buy Agents of Mayhem. The shuttering of THQ back in 2013 was a tragic event for the gaming industry, as the future of so many great franchises was now in doubt. One such franchise was the bombastic, gleefully over-the-top Saints Row. And while we're not getting a direct sequel to Saints Row 4 just yet, we are at least getting the opportunity to return to the universe. Agents of Mayhem looks like an exciting game, not just for fans of the series, but even as a separate game on its own two feet. And we're looking forward to it with giddy anticipation. Here in this feature, we're going to look at 14 things that we feel are going to get you pumped for the upcoming game. If you aren't pumped already, that is. Set in future Seoul. Saints Row games have until now only been set in the USA, with the first two games being set in the fictional city of Stillwater and the next two being set in the also fictional Steelport. The spin-off, Agents of Mayhem, however, is going to be the first game in the larger series to be set in a real-life city, but with its own unique twist. Agents of Mayhem will be set in a futuristic version of Seoul, also making it the first game in the series to be set outside of the USA. A large roster of characters. Unlike previous games in the series, Agents of Mayhem won't restrict you to playing just one character. Instead, this time around, developers Volition are giving you 12 playable characters all at the same time, all with their own unique identities and abilities. Having the option to upgrade all of them and switch between them and test out different combinations during combat and traversal should surely add new layers to the gameplay. Switching characters on the fly. With 12 playable characters to choose from, it'll obviously be important that the game knows how to balance all of these characters and their unique abilities. Agents of Mayhem will allow you to control a squad of 3 agents at a time, while also allowing you to switch between these 3 on the fly in between missions. Picking characters as per their abilities and the requirements of the mission will be important, presumably, so it should be fun to see how the game accommodates all of its playable characters. Procedurally generated mission design. Volition wants to make sure that Agents of Mayhem will have plenty of replay value and that its players will keep coming back for more. The way it chooses to do this is by having missions that are essentially procedurally generated in terms of their design. This is also done because the game will require players to replay missions in order to grind and upgrade their characters, so this should ensure that the game does not get too repetitive. It sounds a little worrying, sure, but there's also a certain appeal to the idea if it's done right, so let's hope Volition manages to pull this off. A huge vertical open world. Saints Row as a series has, of course, always been known for having large open worlds with plenty of insane shit for players to do in them. Agents of Mayhem may be a spinoff, but it won't be moving away from that identity. However, the world of Mayhem will also be quite a large vertical open world, and this verticality will enable players to traverse throughout the city of Seoul in various ways. Not as over-the-top as Saints Row. Saints Row games have always been known for how gleefully and ridiculously over-the-top they are, but it looks like Agents of Mayhem is trying to be a relatively more grounded experience. Sure, you can expect the same brand of humor and randomness as you've been used to in Saints Row, but the vulgarity that you associate with the series will be less prevalent here, and the general tone will be much lighter than you'd expect. No online multiplayer. Unlike its predecessors, Agents of Mayhem is going to be a completely solo outing. There won't be an online multiplayer component, which is rare in today's gaming scenario. It is, however, encouraging to see that developers Volition are choosing to completely focus on a single-player experience, rather than deciding to shoehorn in a competitive component to cash in on demands by players. No co-op. While the premise of Agents of Mayhem, with so many different characters to play as and each with their own unique powers, seems perfect for co-op, and while Volition has had co-op in its older games, Agents of Mayhem will in fact be single-player. According to Volition, this decision was made to ensure that players never felt like they were missing out on anything by not playing multiplayer in a game that has been designed as a single-player experience. No custom avatar. Unlike previous games in the series, you can't have a custom avatar in Agents of Mayhem. Instead, you get to pick from 12 unique characters, each differentiated in terms of powers and context, to play as. Given the emphasis that has been placed on these character powers and stories, I suppose most players might be able to live with this as long as it's actually done well. Mayhem abilities. Mayhem abilities will be incredibly powerful superpowers that each of the 12 agents will have. Each agent's powers are different, but each aid them in battle. Players will probably want to be mindful of the agent's special abilities as they create their roster of 3 for the total pool of 12. Focus on developing characters. As we have mentioned before, the emphasis this time around is on developing and exploring these pre-made characters further. This will also reflect in the gameplay, where you will eventually build up and flesh out your agent and what they can do, and even how they react to different events that happen during gameplay. This mechanic is achieved primarily by experience points and skill trees. Like so many other modern games, Agents of Mayhem will have experience points for your characters and skill trees for you to spend those in and unlock new abilities for your characters. This will determine the growth and progression of your agents as you continue to play with them throughout the game. RPG elements. Experience points and skill trees are basically emblematic of the larger idea that this game will have RPG elements for each of your agents, to determine and control their character growth as you continue to play throughout the game. As you level up, you'll gain access to new powers, skills, and gear, and your character at the end will have abilities far beyond what they did at the start of the game. Upgradable gadgets. Your agents are not the only thing that can be upgraded in this game, since even your gear and gadgets will grow along as you play more of the game. You can find mods to customize and modify how the weapons and items perform, and have their abilities stay in them with your agents' increasingly more powerful and devastating ability to wreak chaos and mayhem. And that'll be about it for this one. If you guys like what we're doing at GamingBolt, please consider subscribing to our channel, and I'll see you guys on the next video.